or it might have just been a footpath, taking people from one place to another. And the old maps are really good because you'll have things like old maps before the Ordnance Survey was set up, because they were sold to the travelling public and they wouldn't really have put down footpaths. There'd be mainly roads and things, so they're always quite good. Sort of in Hertfordshire we've got one from 1766 and one from 1822, and they're really good because they've been shown to be quite accurate, so the county council like them. And then you would go through things like tithe maps. Tithe maps in the mid 1800s, people used to have to give a tenth of their crop to the church. If you had fields, that's a tenth of your produce, or if you had pigs, it'll be one piglet out of every 10. But the church didn't really want all the livestock. So you see tithe barns where they collected all the produce, and the people didn't really like losing a tenth of their produce all the time. So there was Act of Parliament that said you could commute. Instead of paying a tenth of your produce, we'll work out what that is in money, and then you can just pay it as money every year. So that was the idea. And then they decided that instead of paying money every year, we'll work out what the parish owes the church, and we'll just give them some land, and that will cover it instead for the rest of the time. And then nobody has to pay extra money. So tithe maps are really good. They'll be at the County Record Office. Some are in the National Archives, some are online. But they show old routes, and they'll often be marked with footpaths or bridleway or something, because if you've got paths across your land, it's going to be less productive than if it was just, all crop. So they wrote these things down, and because it was done for an Act of Parliament, so they had to do it, then it's good evidence. Or we'd look at enclosure awards. So I'm always moaning about the government stealing land from people and giving it to their friends. But this has been going on for centuries, of course. And the enclosure process was all about taking away common land and allocating it to landowners. And as part of that, and they might have created a common field or something, but that usually disappeared a bit later. They take a bit at a time. But the enclosure process, they had to set out rights of way, roads, footpaths, bridleways, and they're all written down. And amazingly, lots of them are not on today's records, and they could be. And they're easy ones, because if you can show it's in the enclosure award, then you don't need any other evidence. That's good enough. So that's an easy one, if you've got them. And then my other favourite then is 1910. Parliament, the Finance Act that went through Parliament, decided they would tax everyone on the increase in the value of their land. Ostensibly because, the council did something over here, so now your land's worth more. So we'll have some tax off you, please, even though you haven't sold it. As part of doing those valuations, they valued the whole of Great Britain and Ireland, for that, and you'll find white roads on the map. So roads were unproductive; they weren't charged tax on. But footpaths and bridleways, you could claim a discount on your valuation. So you didn't have to, but you could. So the records for the Inland Revenue valuation allow you to see what discounts people claimed. And because they were claiming it so they paid less tax, and also at the time, if you told lies to the valuer, the penalty was 6 months hard labour. It's pretty good that if they've claimed something, then they've got to tell you which, there's a path. Otherwise you can't have that discount. Well, it was so unpopular that they cancelled. There was a change of government next election, and the new government that came in repealed the whole thing after they'd spent 4 or 5 years valuing the whole of the country. But the records that are left over are really good, and they will show you. They'll show you the discounts people took, and hence you'll know that there was a path across this field. So looking at these records, you could choose to look at these records and find which paths you think exist that cross the line of HS2, or even just generally where you live, paths you think are fine and perfectly normal, but if they're not on the official record, which is called the definitive map, held by your county council or unitary authority, if they're not on that and they're historic paths, they stop existing in 2026. So that's that bit in a nutshell. The next thing is that paths also come into existence through usage. And if you can show that a path has been walked or ridden or cycled, but not driven anymore by motor vehicles, but yes, in a horse-drawn carriage or cart, then if it's been used for 20 years, under certain conditions, then a path has come into being. The conditions for this are that the route is used as of right. So it's not by right. If you're using it because you've got permission, or you're using it only in the dead of night, sort of secrecy, or you're thumping anyone who gets in your way because you're going to use it, so violence, so force, permission, or secrecy. If you're using it for any of those, or you pay a toll, or anything that shows you've got permission, then it doesn't count. So effectively, you've got to be trespassing for 20 years, but not you as an individual, it's the public. If enough people have used it in each of the years, 20 years ending now, or ending with it being brought into question by a landowner putting up a gate, putting up a fence, like fencing the corridor that they're going to build a railway on, then you take the date of the fence, work back 20 years and say, can we show some members of the public used it in each of those years? And some people will cover 10 years, 15 years, other people will only say, well, I only used it for 3 years in the middle. You know, but it doesn't matter, they all count. And so you collect all this evidence, statements from people who have used this route, and then you can apply for your path. So that's the two methods, historical evidence and user evidence. And you can have either or both, a bit of each. You can mix and match. Now, when you've collected your evidence, there's a statutory form to fill in. The county council, unitary authority will give you their printed form. Just fill it all in, attach your evidence, and a few words to say who you are and you're applying for whatever you're applying for. And it goes into the system. Now, most councils have got hideous backlogs at the moment. So Hertfordshire, where I do most of mine, they've got, a good. Well, I had one come through the other day that I applied for 20 years ago. So clearly, the landowners for that are really unhappy because for 20 years they've been waiting to find out the answer as to whether they've got a path to deal with or not. Now, if they'd kicked up a fuss, the county might have done it earlier, but this was one that was relatively uncontroversial in the end, and it all went through on the nod. But if there'd been a change of landowner and the new people had said, well, I don't know whether there's a path or not, we'll close it or something, that could have been a real pain. The thing that landowners worry most about is buildings. If they put buildings on where your path goes and you've got your application in, they might have to take the building down. It's either that or they're going to have to divert the path. So they very quickly start talking to you because they don't want to be delayed in getting their planning permission or building their stuff. They want it sorted out. So it can be quite effective at slowing down whatever they were doing, and we've used this technique when people are suddenly building other things that are not wanted by the locals, and they've used this method to delay and to cause everything just to firstly, whether there are paths or not, because the council's got to go through its processes and come to a decision on that, and that can easily take a couple of years. I mean, Parliament thinks it can do it all in a year, but then they make an order, and then there's objections to the order, and then you have to wait till it can have a public inquiry. So by the time you're finished, it's easily 2 years. Best case, if it's opposed, which it will be when there's development. So you can slow everything down like that. But also, I mean, my main aim is not slowing down development. I come at this from, I want to record paths. But Trina thought it would be of interest to you for other reasons, of course. But if you're doing the user evidence, it's really important that you talk to the locals. So it doesn't, you know, you need to be local enough to know what's being used, or to know people who can tell you these answers, and then collect some statements so you can apply for things. But just the application will slow everything down for a bit, even if it's not a very good application, I'm afraid, because they have to go through their statutory process and deal with things. I mainly go for the historical ones. I find them easier than finding individuals, especially in an area I don't live. So I live in Wiltshire now, but I still do rights of way in Hertfordshire because I used to live there. And once you've learnt how everything works and you know who did what when, and for looking at historical evidence, you don't want to pick up a new area. It's easier to keep doing the old one. That's what I find anyway. So I mainly do Hertfordshire, and there's just loads of paths. So I'm coming up to my 300th application for paths, and county of only, that's over 20 years of course. To start with, there was no pressure to get on with it, and it's only since they brought in the cut-off day that we've been trying to get on with it, I suppose. Before, we only applied for things when they were brought into question, or land changed hands and suddenly fence went up. But now we're just applying for everything we've got any evidence for, I suppose, or enough evidence. As we get closer to the cut-off day, we'll go in with less evidence, and you know, we're always hoping something else will turn up to boost the case. But of the 300, county have dealt with had 62 routes added to the map and been turned down on 3. So that's not bad. You know, the evidence, you know, so you can see that the evidence works. And just those top 4 bits of evidence, the tithes, enclosures, Finance Act maps, and the old commercial mapping, you know, most of my applications have those, and that's it. So you don't need to go looking for hundreds of things. You just need to keep it cut down to the bare minimum to get into the process and cause the investigation. The county council, when they get your application, they're supposed to go and do their own research, so they can go to their record office and find other things. You just need to put in enough so that they don't send it straight back to you and say you've forgotten your evidence. You know, you need to put in something of value so that they're looking at it, and then they can get on with doing their bit and deciding what rights exist. What's next? So, historical evidence, user evidence, making an application. When you've made your application, at the moment you go and put site notices up, and they have to let you. And also a year after you've told the council that you've put up your site notices, you don't need site notices if you know the landowner, you know who the landowner is. But I always like site notices because it saves me paying the land registry to find out the extra. You know, trying to keep it on the cheap. But stick up the site notices. A year later, you can complain if you want to the Secretary of State, Planning Inspectorate, and they'll tell the council to get on with it. But of course, if you're trying to slow things down, you just don't do that, and you just let it be, and it'll sit there and annoy everyone until the council gets round to it. So that's a top tip there. So over the last few years, with a friend, we've been going around doing full training days on all sorts of evidence. There's lots of other sources, but these are the top 4. In each of the counties, I think we've been most places in England now, and a couple of places in Wales. And what was really interesting was getting council staff coming to them. And we get things like in Cornwall, the council staff told us they decided they'd got about 5,000 paths that needed recording. Hertfordshire, we've probably got another 200 to apply for, and plus the 300 I've done, so 500. So don't think it's far-fetched that there'll be a path across any particular piece of the railway land that's proposed. It's probably quite likely you'll find some if you get stuck in. The problem we've got at the moment is all the places to look at the documents are sort of a bit closed for COVID. So National Archives has just reopened down in London, in Kew, but they're only open 3 hours a day at the moment when they used to be open, yes, but they'll mainly have stuff for Wales. That's, whereas Kew has got both countries. And so for HS2, of course, you'll be wanting Kew, or the county record offices. I know they're gradually reopening now, but we make an appointment so they don't have too many people in at once. So like for here, I should think there'll be one in Coventry that would have the right sorts of maps. So there's definitely worth looking there, and your parish might have tide maps and enclosures. So parish clerk might be good, or the biggest library that's sort of in the area. Probably worth a try to get hold of these maps. The Finance Act maps, they were done in copies, so they would be a copy that went to the local area and a copy that went to Kew. So all of these things should be in more than one place, and should be freely accessible if you pitch up. But I say you might need an appointment at the moment because a lot of them are worried about too many people in their buildings all at the same time. Any questions so far? Lots. Okay. Do you want to start?
The case here. So HS2, can they close down a bridleway? They probably had notice and stuff to do that, but they were supposed to open up another access point. So they did actually prepare it, but they never opened it, and it stayed closed for about 4 months.
They shouldn't have closed the old one until the new one was in place. In their Act of Parliament, a few years back now, there were schedules that list all the changes they were going to make that had been approved by Parliament. They're not supposed to open, unless they've got separate permission somehow from the county council or unitary authority, then they shouldn't have closed the old one before the new one came in. And there should have been press notices and things to say the diversion was happening. So if they haven't, I think you're okay. So my first point of moaning would be at county council. Is it Warwickshire here or is it Coventry? Warwickshire. So Warwickshire County Council Rights of Way Department. They should be able to tell you. Firstly, they're the enforcement agency, so they can go in and serve notices and force it open. I mean, not if it's been dug out.
It's now back at the old one. Is now back open. They never used the one that they.
Okay, so if it's not currently blocked, you don't really. Nobody will entertain doing anything. No, but they shouldn't have done that in the first place. Yeah. They're not supposed to. Second thing is to see if they built something, is to see if you can't use it and get an extra path. That's the other thing we do, is get extra paths by using them. I go around telling people to use things for 20 years, but actually you don't have to use it for 20 years. If enough people use things, or if the circumstances are just right, then it becomes a path much earlier. There was a court case where somebody built a bridge. It was in London. It was a wide bridge, and they had shops down one side or something. I can't remember. And it joined 2 roads. and this was okay. So this is a funny case about roads, but the court it was in Islington. The court said that the fact that you built a road and opened it to each end, and then people used it, you can't really complain now that it's not a road. It's too late, and that was only after 18 months that they were trying to close it again, and the court said you're too late. And so we have seen paths based on just 3 or 4 years of user evidence, not always the full 20s, when the landowner has done something positive as opposed to it just got used. So if they've constructed something and then people have used it, then that's not going to take much time to become a path. Okay? And if they only use it on foot, it'll become a footpath. If people have cycled it or ridden it and used it on foot, it'll become a bridleway, and so on. So you take the highest form of transport that's used the route, and that tells you what to apply for. Okay?
So if there's a path going through HS2, we can apply for that?
Yeah, so if it's a path that's not recorded on the council's, what they call the definitive map of rights of way, which isn't definitive in the slightest, if it's not on there, then you can apply for it. If it is on there, then the chances are they will have got it written into their Act of Parliament what to do with it, and so they'll have already sorted out the problem. So it won't help you. It's a delay tactic, yes. But of course, while there's a delay, you might get your change of government or change in policy because they've decided they need the money for something else. So you delay and hope, I think.
What did you call that again? The definitive?
The definitive map of rights of way.
Definitive map of rights of way.
Okay, and that's produced by your county council in 2-tier areas and by your unitary authority in single-tier areas for local government.
When we were in court talking about the closure of the footpath here, they said that they were allowed to close the old one, and they didn't have to open a new one because Schedule 4 in Hydroville means that they can close footpaths for health and safety reasons if they only have an opening one. Do you think that's right or wrong?
You need to look at the Act.
Yeah.
You see, normally in highway law, that wouldn't be good enough.
Yeah.
They'd say, build your replace. You know that you're going to make that unsafe, so you have to put your replacement in first, normally. But you'd have to look at the Act. If they've got weasel words in there that they wrote down and got through Parliament, then that would change things. I don't know. I'm not an expert on the HS2 side, I'm afraid.
How can they close Crackley Woods? How can they do that?
Well, to close the road, they'll need an order. So either it's got to be in the schedules to the Act of Parliament, so it's known about and a Parliament said you can close it, or if it's not listed there, then they have to get permission from the county council. Now the county council can give permission, but to do so, well, they can give temporary permission. That's quite easy. They just make a road traffic order prohibiting use for a period of time. 18 months they can do easily. If it's permanent closure, they have to advertise it and listen to objections. So you can object to you can slow down the process that way.
They have a legal right to close the road. They can just go through the council and the council says yes.
If the council just says yes, they still have to advertise it and listen to any representations. But there'll only be a 6-week period or 4-week period for objections to be made, and they only have to listen to people who wrote in that time. So what you often find is they pick their timing, putting the adverts out so that everybody's at Christmas or everybody's doing some, So there's a spate of things during the COVID where they would have had to put a site notice up and nobody would see it back in March. So some developers took advantage of that to say, well, nobody objected because nobody saw it because they were all stuck at home, which is underhand but perfectly legal. So you have to watch out for that. But so that's how it is. So if the council gets too many objections, then they'll have to have a hearing or something. But if you know, the thing is for HS2, they'll say this has had so much publicity, it's so obvious. They'll try and sweep it through, probably, unless your council's on your side. But most of the councils are getting money for things, so they're not really on people's side. But yeah, that's how it works with roads.
Are you aware of anyone doing like a definitive search, trying to find every map, all of these old maps that are on the HS2
Yeah,
route?
lots of
The
people
other
out
one
there.
can do. Is there any sort of
So I
joined up
don't-
thinking or someone overseeing it all, or any?
So all the main user groups are trying to cover England and Wales
Okay.
for the research. But this is for the historical, not for the user evidence. That's always a local matter. But for the national side of things, so the Ramblers Association, the Open Spaces Society, Cycling UK, and the British Horse Society all have volunteers working on their patch. Not all of the groups have got someone in every area, but they all know, oh no, the BHS is doing that one because they've got some volunteers there, or the Ramblers are doing this bit. So contacting any of the main groups and finding the local contact for whatever area, for that piece of railway, I suppose, that's the best thing to do, and they'll know who's doing it. Or they'll know, that's the one bit we haven't got anyone doing. You know, either way, it helps. You know, you find something out.
Yeah, you mentioned